Mother, man.
G'day guys, this is Mick, round 2, Murder Metal Mayhem.
Spreading faster than a case of the clap in a trailer court. Able to shatter eardrums within a 666-mile radius. A podcast more brutal than all the rest. It's Murder Metal Mayhem! This is Pete Altieri with the Murder Metal Mayhem podcast, and I've got the privilege of doing this interview with our good friend, 666 Club member, and former Australian Federal Police officer, Mick. This is the second time you've come on with me, and I'm looking forward to it, mate. How is the weather in Australia?
Mate, it's pouring rain at the moment.
Really?
Yeah, like the weather, like it's warm. It's 23 Celsius, so whatever that, I think that might be 74 or something like that with you guys.
Wow.
But,
okay.
Yeah, it's just absolutely. We got thunderstorms all day today and tomorrow. So, like, yeah, the rest of the country is probably lovely, but Canberra is just shit.
And here, it's not too far off. I mean, it's gotten colder here, but we got our first snow today. It was just kind of a dusting, but it's like, that time of year, having to get bundled up and all that. And today I had to come out and turn the heat on out here in the studio. So it's the first time I've had to deal with that. So it's starting to get that time of year for us. So,
well, how long does the snow last over there? Couple of months.
We usually have it from usually about Thanksgiving, you can start to see it. So it's maybe a little early, but not, every year, of course, is different. But I would say probably 3 months, maybe 3.5.
Yeah.
But, like anywhere, you sometimes have these weird winters that kind of go on, and then some, pretty mild. And, we can't complain, though, here in the Midwest. The weather's been pretty decent, so.
Well, not like last year where Shane was having like feet of
snow.
My
God. Yeah. I don't know how Shane does it up there in Canada. Yeah. Holy shit. Yeah. It's unbelievable. He's had a rough go of it for sure. All right. So good to have you on with another Australian case. And I have been binging on some great Australian true crime. You guys are absolutely nuts, man. I don't know what else to say. I don't know if it's something in the water or what's going on, but I don't think the rest of the world realizes the history that you guys have had when it comes to mobsters, the vice crimes, drugs, and, the rest of it. I don't think people realize it.
No, mate, you're absolutely right. Maybe it's the result of us being a bunch of convicts back in the day. And
I've certainly heard that theory.
Yeah, we're still stuck in that mentality. But look, yeah, you're absolutely spot on. It's that we've got a long history. Obviously from the immigration side, especially the Italians coming over in the early 1900s. That's where, a lot of that organised crime started.
Okay.
But, even now, as I said earlier before we started, the Calabrian mafia was extremely strong in Australia, and when you look at all of the things that have happened either in Sydney or in Melbourne, with the gangland wars, they're all Calabrian orientated.
When you say Calabrian, today, what is that? What?
It's an area of Italy, Calabria.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
So in Australia, from a organised crime sort of area, you've got the Sicilians. I think, everyone knows about the Sicilian mafia.
Oh, yeah. I'm a quarter Sicilian.
Oh, okay. So and being from New York or Jersey,
yeah,
you probably
from the
know
Bronx,
all about
for
it.
sure. I know all about it.
And so you've got the Sicilians, you've got the guys from Naples, from Napoli, and then you have an area called Calabria.
Okay.
And a lot of the early organised crime guys, and even ones now, descendants from the Calabrian immigrants.
Interesting.
So we've got there's some famous sort of cases, in the 70s, regarding there's a little town not far from Canberra called Griffith, which was the cannabis growing sort of capital of Australia.
Okay.
And it was heavily influenced by the Calabrians, to the point where, some politicians and anti-drug campaigners were kidnapped and murdered by them.
Oh, wow.
So their tentacles, still reach around. Today they run, they pull the strings with most of the Middle Eastern crime syndicates. They pull the string with the bikies, and there was talking to some old colleagues in the AFP just recently, they estimate there's about 5,000 active, mafia entities or mafia guys in Australia at any one time.
Oh, wow. Interesting. Yeah, I had no idea that it was the Italians were that involved with it because, like I said, from my background, I know that they had a heavy influence in the United States, but I didn't realize that it was going all the way to Australia as well. I've seen some interesting Italian names as I've done, my documentaries and so forth. But like I said, not to what you were thinking of. So that's interesting. Yeah. Now, tonight we're going to talk about Rogerson, definitely a funny name for sure. But his parents must have had a good sense of humor, I guess. But
yeah, that's right.
He's a decorated police officer who went horribly off the rails. I mean, before that, though, what sort of reputation he had, because he was like a hero cop, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. He was the poster boy. He's extremely well respected, and well thought of, detective and police officer, and even, when I was going through college, when I was training, yes, we all knew about him, but there was still a very high, I suppose, respect for him as as an investigator. And at one point, he was even, touted as being commissioner material.
Oh, wow. So did he start out from the like patrolling and then moved into detective and that sort of thing?
Yeah, so it was a little bit different, back when he sort of started, in the 50s and 60s, but the process is still the same. Everyone has to do uniform police work.
Right.
Then you'll go into, a plainclothes sort of area. And he did everything from homicide to, special vice crimes through to drugs, so he was extremely, well respected.
Yeah, and that's what makes it even worse, the fall from grace. When somebody's that good at what they do and that respected, to have that go completely the other way, which of course we're going to get to, but just unbelievable.
Well, that was part of the issue, is that because he was so well respected and so well thought of, that when any time anyone would bring up, any impropriety around him,
right,
it was just dismissed. It couldn't be Roger,
of course,
because he's just
Superman.
13 decorations, medals for bravery and all sorts of things. So
right,
it was just dismissed as, some crook essentially trying to get their go over on Roger.
Interesting. I can see that though.
Yeah, but as we're going to get to, it's come to pass that, they were actually telling the truth.
Yeah, and it's ironic because when I was in Little League, I may have told this on the podcast before, but when I was in Little League, one of our assistant coaches was a former NYPD detective, and he would always invite my dad. My dad was a parole officer in New York. Would invite my dad and us over for like cookouts, and my dad would always politely decline. And then one year the guy brought an actor with him and said, "Oh, I wrote this book about my police career and they're going to shoot a movie and this guy's going to play me in the movie." And we thought he was kidding. And my dad was like, "No, he's not." And then it wasn't until years later, after I, wasn't on the team anymore, I was older, and my dad let me watch the movie called Prince of the City with Treat Williams, and it was about how he turned on all his buddies and wore a wire and like took down all these cops, and he was dirty, but it was the same type of thing. He was so highly regarded. He thought of him, that's why they called it Prince of the City. They were like princes, they were untouchable. And I think that may be part of this with Roger. He just had this ego that was just bigger than life and just probably thought he could get away with anything because I'm Roger Rogerson, you know.
Oh, absolutely. And coming up through the ranks, he had some good mentors. There was, similar people who he had trained with who ended up, being dirty as well.
Interesting.
And we look back now, was it just the time? It was a completely, as we've discussed previously, the times were incredibly different.
Right.
Probably your dad's mate, and if you've got friends who are old school cops,
right.
How they did things was just very different, and it was not so much that there was this perverse sense of morality, but they could do anything and anything just to get the job done.
Right.
And if it meant crooks were disposed of or gotten rid of, or they're out of the way, it doesn't matter because
the ends justify the means.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, very, very good point. Now we have done cases on Murder Metal Mayhem about cops that have gone bad. Like you had recently emailed me about our episode on the Florida cop, Gerard Schaefer. And that's what kind of prompted me to go, we really need to get that Roger Rogerson episode in here. Now, what drives cops? Do you think it is, monetary? Is it, the power? Is it maybe a combination?
Oh, it's probably all of the above. You've got, there's a certain type of person who gets, attracted to or drawn towards law enforcement, or emergency services in general.
Right.
And, some of them, have a genuine, need to help. Some of them, were bullied at school, so this is their chance to, exert their authority and,
right,
have some sense of power.
Right.
And look, in my experiences, I've said, previously in emails, I've done, a fair bit of, corruption investigation, internal affairs, you would call it, regarding, police behaviour, and it comes down to two things, people are like that and they're drawn towards policing because it's a way to exploit, vulnerable people.
Right.
Which I think Gerard Schaefer, he was crooked before he even became a cop.
Oh God, yeah, he was terrible.
And some people who are close to Roger, say the same thing. He was bad before he even got there.
Interesting.
And then others, it's about being that, getting that power, getting that authority, being able to, exploit other people, a good sort of thing. Your dad and probably Tex might even be able to comment as well, having similar experience with custodial officers.
Right.
That you've got, at times guys who are just, for whatever reason, are compromised, and then, the crooks own them.
True.
And if they do something, even if it's insignificant, they want their job, and that's more important. So they'll just keep doing whatever they're doing.
Right.
And
once you start, you can't really stop.
Once they've got their claws in, they're easy, and, when I was, in the AFP or in policing, there was three things that we were always, told to watch out for, and that's or three things that would get you into trouble. One of them is property, so exhibits. So if you don't handle your exhibits properly, or you start to steal property, from the property room.
Oh.
The next one is money. So, and that might be, people are offering you bribes. It might be, whatever. And the third thing is women or sexual relationships.
Yeah, we had the same thing in the Army, to not be compromised with like intelligence from other countries. The guys that had affairs, anything that you do that you don't want to get out, you're putting yourself in a very vulnerable situation.
Yeah, absolutely. And from a policing perspective, that's exactly right. So there, as I said, there's people who are always bad, and they just gravitated towards policing because it's what you do. It's an easy job, so to speak. You don't have to be a rocket scientist or have a degree to become a police officer.
Right.
So the educational requirements are a lot less. It's decent money. And it's a stable job.
Right. Yeah, you're always going to need it. That's for sure.
Oh, mate, absolutely.
More than
Absolutely.
ever, more than ever. Now, it was the Ananda Marga case where rumors started floating around about false confessions, and I read that a man by the name of Tim Anderson said upon his release in 85 that he was, coerced into giving a false confession. And this is kind of the start of Rogerson starting to be, doing some things that maybe were not right. Would you agree with that? Was that kind of the case that seemed to bring that to light?
It's the first one that became public. Later on, when a lot of the things that Roger was involved in, the Whiskey A Go Go nightclub fire,
Right.
which was in Brisbane, back in '73. Once they do a royal commission, of that years and years later, you start to find out that, during that, he's fabricating evidence, he's falsifying statements. But the Hilton bombings, this obviously relates to the Hilton bombing, in Sydney. And that's
Right.
the first time, when someone has openly come out and said, he's forced me to make a statement.
Mm-hmm.
We had nothing to do with it, but the confessions were forced out of us.
Yeah, we've been talking for years about doing a false confessions episode, which I think would be good because there's a lot of that,
Oh,
unfortunately.
absolutely. Yeah, look, and our system is fairly rigorous, as far as now what you're expected to do, for interviewing, crooks or suspects.
Right.
I don't know what it's like in the States at the moment, but we're extremely strict. Everything has to be audio and video recorded.
Right.
There is just transparency, out the wazoo.
Yeah.
But it's also interesting, to not to harp on it, but to get back to when we did the Martin Bryant episode about the conspiracies.
Right.
There's this an Anamaga or the Hilton bombing, that also sparked this massive, conspiracy theory. Because that's when the AFP started. So prior to that, there wasn't an Australian Federal Police. There was a territory police and a Commonwealth Police.
Okay.
And this really started the form of it. But, the conspiracy theory was that because it was a Commonwealth heads of government, so you would have them all the governors, whereas we've got premiers, all of the premiers were together, in a big meeting, that, our national security agencies, similar to the CIA or, FBI, were the ones who were responsible and they planted the bombs and,
right.
They all blew it up. So even with that, there's this mass conspiracy theory that Roger, had no involvement. It was all to do with, these national security agencies planning it all.
Interesting. Yeah, I think the conspiracy thing is just, especially nowadays, it's like everybody wants a conspiracy about something, So,
Yeah.
What's the latest?
Exactly. It can't just be, face value. There's got to be something,
Right.
something more
Some
different to it.
insidious force going on there.
Yeah. But
Now-
sorry, but yeah, look, he was crooked before this.
Yeah.
As I said, well, once it all starts to come out, but Tim Anderson, as you said, was the first person who really, came out, once he got released and said, well, hang on a minute, it was actually forced out of me.
Right. Now, when it comes to the drugs side of what Roger Rogerson was involved with, how did that all come to pass? I mean, is it just because you're working with all these drug dealers, you're busting them, you're knowing who the people are? I mean, how does that all work with a guy like this?
Oh, look, absolutely. So it's obviously through who he's met, as a police officer, and being in, special branch or a vice crime or a drug team, he's being exposed, and, you mentioned, before the show about Nettie Smith.
Right.
He's probably the most famous sort of business associate
Right.
or partner of Roger.
Right.
He was a huge heroin dealer, in Sydney back in the day. And it's just, essentially, it started as Roger busting him, and next minute, there's, bribes and, money under the table to make, investigations go away.
Right.
there was suggestions, that when cocaine really started to come into the country, that that Roger, was trying to get a bit of a hold on in that, as well.
Wow.
And as we know from the Jamie Gow murder, that was all about meth or
Right.
or ice.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're in a position like Roger, where essentially you're a law unto yourself,
Right.
mate, he had connections, unbelievably,
Wow.
and he was on the take from everybody.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I mean, it was like a full blown enterprise he had going on. This is
Yeah,
unbelievable.
absolutely.
Yeah, I couldn't
Absolutely.
imagine trying to peel that onion back once
Oh, mate.
this all started to fall apart. Like, holy crap,
Oh, look, he kept his composure, to a degree.
Oh
Everyone was,
yeah, he was slick,
everyone was a lying junkie, and everyone was just a crook. And
right?
and how can they speak ill of someone who's so decorated, and
Right.
and his arrogance was probably part of the reason that
Oh yeah.
he really fell.
Right. Right.
Because he didn't think that he ever did anything wrong, and as you said, the ends justify the means.
That's right. That's right. Now, the another controversial episode with him was the shooting death of Warren Lanfranchi.
Yep.
Rogerson claimed it was in self-defense and that LaFranchi was going for his gun, but then later LaFranchi's girlfriend said the gun was at home and that he didn't even have a gun with him. So that certainly was a big scandal there of how did this guy kill you, or how did you kill him in self-defense when he didn't even have a gun on him, and did he plant the gun on him, type of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And Lanfranchi was a dealer. He was one of Nettie Smith's crew. Essentially, and
Okay.
And part of it, depending on obviously whose version of events you listen to,
Right.
whether it's Rogers or everybody else,
Right.
is that he was paying Roger 10 grand to make an investigation go away, and essentially Roger met up with him, and the $10,000 went missing, and Lanfranchi ended up getting shot because of it.
Wow.
So it was certainly, questionable in relation to whether or not it was self-defense.
Right.
As you said, the girlfriend, Sally, essentially had said, well, the gun was at home, and he had all this money, essentially, shoved down the front of his trousers or wherever it was,
right.
to give to Roger so that the investigation in relation to him would go away.
Right.
Right. But it's interesting from some of the docos that you listen to. They've got witnesses who are residing in the buildings, around where it occurred.
Right.
And their version of events to what they heard, doesn't match, Roger's version of events of how it went down.
Right. Right. And speaking of Sally, Sally Ann Huckstep, she winds up getting murdered herself, and you got to think Roger had to have something I mean, I can't believe that happened in a vacuum for sure,
Not at all. Blind Freddy can probably put two and two together,
right.
and work out that, that's just a little bit too coincidental.
Right.
Roger got off on the Lanfranchi murder. The coroner who did the investigation said, yes, it was self-defense.
Wow.
But all of the, the cops who were around there would have been on Roger's team, so they would obviously have backed him. But
Right.
yeah, absolutely. With Sally, ending up, dying, like she made Roger's life a misery.
Oh, I'm sure.
And she was the real start of, things starting to unwind for Roger.
Right.
Because she's come out, she's on national television, she's doing interviews with 60 Minutes, and she's not pulling any punches.
No.
It's
she's the grieving, widow.
Absolutely.
I mean, very sympathetic, despite some of her past, but not to shame, but even despite her past, she was a very sympathetic figure.
Oh, absolutely. She came from a, relatively good, family background.
Right.
There was no, sort of issues in that sense. Just unfortunately, that's the path that she went down. But looking at her circumstance, you can see, in a couple of the interviews where Roger talks about, he had an alibi, he was somewhere else, he had nothing to do with it.
Right.
But it's all coincidental that Nettie Smith again, is back in the picture. He's the one who drove her, to the area, to meet a drug dealer so that she could score, and next minute, she's, drowned.
Right.
So he got found guilty of it or charged, in relation to her murder. So Nettie Smith, but he was, acquitted a couple of years later for lack of evidence.
Interesting.
But it's just all too coincidental that, her boyfriend, who's part of Nettie Smith and Roger's gang, essentially, gets killed for 10 grand.
Right.
And next minute, Nettie's involved again, and
right.
and Sally ends up dead.
Yeah, exactly. Now, speaking of crazy ones, the incident with the shooting of the police officer, Michael Drury, that one was insane. He gets shot through his kitchen window. His family's there, but he survives. Why did he end up getting shot?
Oh, look, this is another one, where according to him, he's absolutely certain that Roger was involved.
Right.
And it came back to, he was a former colleague of Roger's, and they were he had an investigation with a guy called Alan Williams in Melbourne, who was a heroin dealer.
Okay.
And, the story is that, through Roger, Williams was trying to get to Drury to bribe him to essentially, drop the case. So, there was a fairly big bust. He was going to face some serious time, and it was a matter of, William saying to Roger, who was his mate, can you get at Drury? We'll offer him a bribe, to make the investigation go away. And, obviously Drury was clean. He wasn't going to be a part of it.
Right.
And as a result, poor old Michael gets, as you said, shot through the kitchen window with his family at home.
Yeah, that's horrible.
And some years later, Williams, who was the lad from Melbourne, who the investigation was in relation to, had testified, in court that, he agreed to pay Roger and a guy called Chris Flannery, Mr. Rent-A-Kill, he was known in Australia.
I remember that one.
Pay him 50 grand each, to get rid of Drury, to make the investigation go away. So, he's come out, openly, in court, and testified that,
right.
he tried to bribe him through Roger, and then offered Roger and Chris Flannery 50K each to get rid of him.
Jeez, my gosh. Now, the one that really did him in, you alluded to this a little bit ago, is the case of Jamie Gow, who's this young kid. He's trying to do this drug deal to make some quick cash involving a whole bunch of meth, several keys of ice, also known as meth. But what a shitty execution of a hit job with this one. I mean, it's as if he took everything he learned as a police officer and crime lord and threw it out the window with this one. I don't even, if it was just his hubris got so big that he thought he was completely above the law, or senility, or what the deal is of how this all happened. I mean...
Oh, mate, yeah, this is amateur hour 101.
Right.
As you said, coming from a policing background, you think he would have known a hell of a lot better.
Right, because they met him at that storage locker.
Yeah.
And it's all on video. I mean, the whole thing is on videotape. I mean, you could see him walk up. He's got this very distinct... Roger's got this bad hip, I think it was, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And he walks almost like the Penguin. I mean, it's that pronounced If you watch any of these documentaries, you'll see what we're talking about. But there's no mistaking that's who it was, walking up to the storage locker and then boom, boom, 2 shots and Jamie Gow is dead. And they, I'm assuming, took all the money and, everything. So, I mean, he, like with the other case with the guy that was killed to the 10 grand, I mean, he just doesn't think anything of it.
Not at all, and obviously, he was mates with this other ex-policeman, Glenn McNamara.
That's the one, yes.
And that's quite a famous, case and quite well known, in the true crime sort of area,
right.
in Australia.
Right.
Is that, just blatant stupidity, and obviously Gow was wanting to make a name for himself. He was
right.
trying to be a gangster, being mainland Chinese originally, he was trying to get in with the Chinese triad, as far as, some, drug distribution goes.
Okay.
And a little bit naive on his behalf that he thought if he hooked up with, an ex-cop or a crooked ex-cop.
Right.
That, there's some sense of honor among thieves,
gotcha.
And he'll watch his back.
Right.
Not
so much.
No, he probably should have done a little bit more homework and would have realized that,
right.
McNamara would have sold him out.
Right.
And it was obviously, they lured him to a storage unit. If you, depending on who you talk to, they obviously blame each other for it.
Right, right.
McNamara said that, Roger did it and vice versa.
Right, right.
I was just there, but I didn't pull the trigger, or
right.
I was there, and I just helped clean up.
Right.
So I'm not as guilty, but
then the other part of it with the boat, I mean, they took him and they just threw him in the water, wrapped in like a tarp, like they thought he was going to magically sink. Like, I just don't understand why they didn't weight him down or do anything. I mean, he just was thrown in the water like a piece of garbage, and somebody found him pretty quick.
Yeah. I think it was like a surfboard cover or something like that.
I think
that they've obviously put him into a surfboard cover, and a couple of days later, he's found floating in Sydney Harbour.
Yeah, he had his shoes on him and everything, so this is really stupid,
Absolutely, and you don't have to be, a policeman to turn around and go, well, that was pretty amateurish done. I'm sure. I've watched enough television shows to realize that you want to weigh him down with something.
Right. And McNamara is on video leaving his apartment with the boat, and you could see that surfboard cover in the boat. So he's on video there. I mean, these cops should have known you're on video friggin' everywhere you go,
Yeah, and I
just
think
really
it was part
stupid.
Yeah, mate. Yeah, absolutely. Just completely, either ignorant, or had thought that it's so. Gow was such a nobody,
right?
That if he goes missing, no one's ever gonna, think twice,
right?
I'm
sure that was a big part of it. They just thought he was such a small fish, and where who we are, they were both really cocky, and obviously they bit off more than they could chew. It's really stupid.
Mate, they were both desperate for money. They were both broke, and it was an easy way to get some fast cash. But like most of these sort of circumstances, the execution was poorly done, and they didn't clean up after themselves.
No, that was just really, really bad. Now, Roger's currently in prison. What kind of sentence did he end up getting?
Yeah, well, he ended up life sentence. So he's an old man.
Right.
He's
81,
in a place
I think.
Yeah, he's in a prison in Sydney called Long Bay, which is it's one of the older sort of heritage listed early 1900s, sort of custodial sort of place around Australia. Well known for some of the more serious criminals go there.
I was wondering if he was in like more of a hospital setting, being older like that. Is that how that works?
Yeah, he's probably, in like you said, in a hospice, or some sort of geriatric ward, or whatever it is.
Right.
He's
He's
been
not jacking weights on the prison
no,
yard.
no, and he's relegated to just
Playing
doing basic,
checkers.
yeah, basic cleaning roles and stuff like that. But
Right.
as a massive, massive fall from grace.
Right.
And the
Terrible.
sad thing is, like all of these things, the sad thing is it affected his wife and his family. And,
Yeah, all the lives he ruined just from
oh,
false confessions. I mean, I can't even think of how many people he must have cursed the moment he was born, knowing
yeah,
when that all came out, when you realize your life's been destroyed by this
mm.
piece of garbage, it could be past the point of being able to get anything back, It's
Oh,
terrible.
look, and he says in his own, admission that he wanted to make a name for himself. He wanted to be known as a good cop, and to go up through the ranks. The three murders, for want of a better word, or self-defense shootings, that he did when he was a police officer.
Right.
Len Franchi being one of them. All ended or resulted in acts of bravery, or police commendation. But
Right.
how many of those were like Len Franchi set up?
BS. Right.
Yeah, absolute nonsense.
Right.
And that's the guy he was.
Yeah.
In the over a decade, almost a decade and a half that I was with police, I can count on one hand the amount of times I had to pull a firearm.
Right.
Whereas this guy's shot and killed 3 people.
Right. Right. How
Got,
does this seem to follow him everywhere he goes?
no, exactly. There's a lowest common denominator.
Right.
And it seems to be him.
Yeah, that's true. That's
And
true.
no one tended to look into it because of the
Right.
fact that he was the golden child.
Right. Imagine how many more there could be that we don't even know
Oh,
about that aren't the high profile ones, I mean,
yeah,
this didn't
absolutely.
just happen, that I would find it very hard to believe that these are the only people that he was involved with murdering. I would find it
Well,
very hard to believe.
I'd probably agree. So whether it was things that he did himself, or at least he was
A part
aware
of it.
of.
Right.
Yeah, so whether it was part of the gangland process that was happening at the time,
Hmm.
I'm sure. Like, he was very good mates with Chris Flannery, who was the Mr. Rent-A-Kill.
Right.
And I'm sure, like you said, that there's probably cases where Flannery has been contracted to do something that Rogers had a finger in the pie.
Oh, I'm sure. I'm sure. Yeah, and I mean, there's so many good ones we could do. I mean, Nettie Smith, Nicole Radyev, Chow Haynes. I mean, there's some really good ones that we could do. And even the one we were talking about before we started, Derek Percy, which is an awful child killer, but they refer to him as Australia's Hannibal Lecter. I don't know if I would use that description for him, but just an awful human being. But there's so many good Australian cases, but I am definitely fascinated with the gangland stuff, and I think there's certainly more episodes we could do together like this, Mick, with some of these other characters.
Oh, look, and I'm sure that there's probably similar ones. Like everyone knows about the New York Mafia,
Right.
and all the the Donnie Brasco movies and
Right.
Goodfella movies and
Oh,
all of
yeah.
these things. But as I said, we've got similar examples.
Right.
The Melbourne gangland murders, the gangland war was a huge issue in the 80s.
Yeah, we just did that episode on the Shankill Butchers, which is,
Yeah.
Belfast. That's one I bet a lot of people didn't know about.
No,
Gangland
yeah.
shootings in the streets, driving around in a taxi cab, grabbing people off the street and then hacking them up with hatchets and throwing them
Oh.
on the side of the road. I mean, just brutal,
Oh,
So
that was absolutely. That was
there's a lot
that
of
was a terrible one.
carnage all over the world, So yeah, it's not just here in the U.S. You guys have your share of it down there too.
That's right. That's right. But as you said, ours tend to be a little bit more crazy, I suppose.
Yeah, you guys are definitely. Speaking of crazy, I just watched a documentary I hadn't seen before on Catherine Knight, which they
Oh,
got
yeah.
more. They got more into the talking to the police that responded to that. Holy shit! I mean, I couldn't even imagine when they realized that that was his skin hanging from
Again,
that hook. Oh my
yeah,
gosh! I mean,
trying to work
wow.
out exactly. The guy's trying to work out what it was.
And trying to find his head, and then they walked into the kitchen and they saw that pot on the stove, and like,
Oh,
oh my
yeah, mate.
god, yeah,
She was a
wow,
yeah, she was brutal.
she was a real beaut, yeah. I think
bring
that
bring
was
her
our
home.
first Mother's Day episode, was Catherine Knight, if I'm not mistaken. So
Yeah. I
that
think
was a good one.
last time we discussed that. Yeah, like she was, as I said, just recently when I sent you that message that it's been 21 years,
Right,
since
that's
she's been
right,
locked up.
that's right.
And has tried to get out, and
Oh yeah,
obviously
she's not
that's never
going
going to
anywhere.
happen. No, no, not at all,
There's
not at
no
all.
way. There's no way.
But just the ability to to field dress the skin and peel it
Uh,
off, and
and that they were able to put it back on his body. That's just like, oh my gosh, that's just
yeah,
like horror
that's
show stuff.
that's yeah, it's a whole new level.
Now, anything you wanted to add to this conversation, Mick? I mean, one thing I wanted to point out, and I know that, we've had conversations like this both on and off camera, so to speak, but, certainly never saying in episodes like this that all cops are bad. This is a very small percentage. Unfortunately, they're the ones that people know about, and you don't hear about all those tremendous things that first responders and police officers do day in and day out. It's very unfortunate, obviously, that this guy, tarnishes a very noble profession. But, I just wanted to go on record as saying that. I don't want people to, hear this and think trying to put all the eggs in one basket there.
Yeah, look, cheers, thank you. Yeah, look, see, most people join, policing or emergency services or corrections like Tex and your dad, for the right reason.
Right.
They've got an interest in the area, or if it's the town, for example, where Tex come from, and there's 7 prisons, that's just
Right.
what you do.
Right.
That's the employer,
Right.
and you go and work there. But most people, do the right thing.
Right.
There's a select few, unfortunately, like Roger and like McNamara and like a few others that we've got, in Australia as well as everywhere else, who, as you said, they do, tarnish it.
Right.
And it's easy, to say, well, fuck the police, and it's
Right.
all cops are bad, and look what happens, and but it's a select few,
Yes.
But when they do the wrong thing, they don't do a half job. They make sure
Right.
they go all the way.
They could really ruin a lot of lives, unfortunately, because
Oh,
of the power that they wield,
absolutely. And there's cases, or examples, in probably every police officer's life,
Right.
where, they can name someone who's, may not be overly corrupt, but, has, gotten a benefit, because of their badge.
Right.
And being able to, get away with things that you wouldn't normally get away with.
Yeah. My dad used to
Yeah.
get into the Yankee games with his badge.
Yeah.
They did away with that years ago, but I could remember going to games with him, and he would talk about what it was like back in the day when you just used to show your badge and they'd let you into the game, so.
Oh, well, the very good example is McDonald's. There's a worldwide policy from McDonald's that
Really?
all frontline emergency services workers get half price McDonald's.
That's awesome.
But from our perspective, from a policing perspective, it can be seen as being, abusing your position if you're walking
Oh.
into a McDonald's and saying, hey, can I have a half price Big Mac, mate?
Right.
So it's changed a lot, as I said, from what it was like, and back in the day, when Roger and a few other of these guys were around, it was just get the results.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't matter what happens. If a couple of people go missing, if a couple of people complain about you, you're not doing a good job unless
Right.
someone's complaining about you, because you're trying to be friends with everybody.
That's true. Yeah.
Back then it was, he would have had an amazing, career as far as, working with sources and snitches and, knowing what's occurring. It's just that, he didn't use it appropriately.
Right.
And saw the dollar signs.
That's true. That's true. The abuse of power just rampant with this guy for sure.
Oh, mate, he was. But as I said, some of the things you look at, and some of the people who have known him from the past,
right,
is that he was always like that. It wasn't the fact that he came in and then developed this sense of ego and sense of importance.
Right.
He was always that way. Right from the start, and it was probably a bit what's the word, like telling that this is where he ended up.
Sure. Wow.
Without those checks and balances, this is the sort of thing. But even to this day, it's not his fault. It's someone else's fault. And
I'm sure.
He was never responsible for it, and all these other people like Sally Ann and Len Frankie and everyone else who was involved in. They got their just desserts,
Yep.
But we ended up, solving the crimes.
Right.
And if you go back to, as I said earlier, 1973 with the Whiskey A Go-Go, which is a very famous arson of a nightclub, in Brisbane. Even back, at that point, which was, not long into his career.
Right.
They've got two suspects. They haven't got any evidence, so they fabricate it. So right from the start, he's happy to falsify,
right,
evidence and fabricate things just to get, the end result. So,
sure.
He can get a shiny medal to say that, look what he did.
That's just more incentive for him to keep doing it,
Damn straight.
Bigger and bigger,
straight. Yeah, absolutely.
Wow. Well, thanks a lot for coming on with us, Mick, and taking time out of your Sunday, my Saturday. So still trying to wrap my arms around that you're 17 hours ahead of where I'm at. But appreciate you taking the time out as always. And thanks for being a huge supporter of Murder Metal Mayhem, man.
Not a problem. My pleasure. And once again, thanks for having me on. It's fantastic. And as I said last time, you guys put a very good spin on things. It's lighthearted. It's lighthearted, and people can relate to it.
Yeah, I appreciate that very much. So you're always welcome to come on. I'm sure we can dig up maybe Nettie Smith or one of these other characters. That'd be a good one.
Yeah, Chris Rent-A-Kill.
Yeah, and I have to see if I can organize and get you and Chopper Reed in the same room to do a video call with me.
Well, unfortunately, Chopper's dead.
Oh, is he? Oh, okay.
Yeah, he died a few years ago. From
shit. That would have been rich. I could have organized that.
Well, interestingly, there was before Roger ended up going to prison for the Gow murder, Roger, Chopper Reed, and another crazy, sportsman called what was his name? He was an Australian rules, so like a football player. They would tour around, doing speaking comedy shows.
Right.
They were called like just three nutbags. And they were all together and they would sit down and tell their stories.
Wow.
So it was Chopper telling his side of things, Roger, in all of his, tomfoolery that he was up to.
Right.
And this other Australian sportsman who was equally as fucking crazy.
Right. Right.
And linked into all of them as well.
Right.
And they would just wander around. But I was actually listening. There's an Australian journalist called Andrew Rule,
okay,
who is a crime reporter and has been for like the last 30 or 40 years. And he was the one of the co-writers for the Underbelly series. And he actually wrote all of the Chopper Reed books.
Oh, okay.
But someone had asked him once, who was the worst person that he's ever had to interview, that he ever had to do a story on. And he said Rogerson. He said he was the worst, most dangerous, crooked person he's ever had to interview and ever had to report on.
Amazing.
Because he was just dangerous. You knew, if you crossed Roger, you went missing.
Right. That's true. All right,
So,
Mick. Well, thanks again, my friend. We'll talk to you
Thanks,
soon.
mate.
All right.
Will do.
Mother, man.